Stop watching Fox or CNN or whatever you watch all day. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of TRD Talks Live. I'm Erik Engquist, Senior Managing Editor at The Real Deal. I'm happy to be joined today by Erik Benaim, founder and CEO of Modern Spaces Real Estate, and Kyle Bragg, president of 32BJ SEIU, which represents tens of thousands of building service workers. Welcome to you both.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Today, we're going to talk about three major projects in Queens. But it's not just about Queens, because these projects, I feel, will say a lot about the future of development in New York City, depending on how they go, whether they're approved, the kind of opposition that they face, and whether that is overcome. So I want to start, if I could get each of you to weigh in on what is at stake here. The three projects, and we'll get into the details later, but they are Sunnyside Yard, which is a massive city project, and then two private projects, one in Astoria and one in Long Island City. And these are all multi-billion-dollar projects that require some level of political approval. So let me start with you, Kyle, if I could. What do you think is at stake for your members and for the city at large in terms of whether these go forward?
Well, first, I think that this city needs development. It needs development, but it needs good quality development that answers the needs of our city, particularly now, and as we are still within a pandemic. We've never seen this many people out of work in this city. And for us to recover and rebound, I think we need responsible development. We can continue to build good communities responsibly, communities that provide good family-sustaining jobs, communities that will help to also build as they develop infrastructure that will meet the needs of the expanding communities or the creation of new communities. Some of these developments that we're talking about now are dedicated to creating more schools, expanding on the infrastructure, providing affordable housing, which city still is in a serious housing shortage and housing crisis. I think that we need more affordable housing, but we also need workforce housing. My members and many other union members in the city and need places to live. And I think that this city is going to be very dependent on a recovery on who and how we are best able to create good jobs. And I think that these developments are a key aspect of a recovery post-pandemic.
Now, Erik, let me switch to you, because I know when I think of Long Island City, I think of you first, actually, and you were in the center of the whole Amazon rise and fall, if you will. A year ago on Valentine's Day, Amazon pulled out of that major, multi-billion-dollar second campus project in Long Island City. So here we are again. We have another multi-billion-dollar project proposed for the same spot, actually. And once again, you have opposition, but things have changed in terms of we had a booming economy before, and now we have a declining one.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, my heart's still broken over the whole Amazon thing. It's a year and a half about a year and a half now, I guess, since they left. And they took with them 25 to 40,000 jobs. And over here, you have a group of developers who came up with what I think is a really great, vibrant plan that offers 26,000 jobs, plus another 48,000 construction jobs, at a time where I think New York City needs jobs and people need to work more than ever. And this wasn't planned just recently, this was planned over the past year. And unfortunately, recently, some local leaders have been opposing this. but we still haven't seen anybody with any solutions on how to create new jobs, except for
it's funny you mentioned that, because a lot of these folks who are opposing these actually don't want to create new jobs because they see jobs as a trigger for gentrification and displacement. I think the three of us remember the days when everything was about jobs, but I think those days have kind of passed in a way. That the centerpiece of all these discussions now is what are the negative effects. And it used to be just NIMBY, not in my backyard. People didn't want the construction or the traffic. But now it's more about, these jobs are going to force people to leave the neighborhoods they grew up in. So just very briefly, the Long Island City Project, which is by TF Cornerstone, Plaxall, Simon Barron Development, and MAG Partners, which is Mary Ann Gilmartin's firm. It's 10 to 12 million square feet. It's up to 15 buildings. These would be anywhere from 37 to 64 stories. It's a big project. It's 7 acres of open space. It's about, it's mostly commercial, but no market rate housing, all affordable housing, and workforce centers, cultural space, and up to 3 public schools. Yet opposition formed almost immediately from Jimmy Van Bramer and other local officials. How do you explain that? I just wondered if you could give an explanation of how we've come to this point.
I think a lot of the leaders are listening to a really small group, constituents in the neighborhood. They're not the majority of the neighborhood. If you go and speak to the PTA of all the schools in the neighborhood, go speak to April Simpson, who's the president of the Queensbridge Tenants Association, or Bishop Taylor, or any of the other local leaders, and just ask them if they want these jobs and this development over here. Every single one of them will say yes. I can't find one of the PTA parents who'll say that they don't want this over here. Of course we want this over here.
Yeah, and Kyle, you're pretty in touch with the political winds of the city, because 32BJ is one of the most politically powerful unions we have. It's one of the few unions that I feel can elect or unelect people on occasion. So you kind of have the pulse of the way elected officials think, and you're also a community board member, so you understand how people are on the ground are thinking as well. So I wonder if you could give me your take on how you explain the opposition that has popped up politically.
Well, I wish I could explain the opposition, but I can certainly talk to those people who understand and need these type of opportunities to be created for their communities. I mean, Erik had said it. There are so many people in these communities. You talk about Queensbridge housing, and all these folks. There's 16 million people unemployed in this country now, and what this pandemic has done is pulled back a curtain and shown that a lot of these communities have been hit the hardest and continue to be hit the hardest. Black communities, communities of color, who are lacking opportunities, lacking new jobs in the areas in which that here in the city that can be provided for them. And so if you ask who is in favor of this, talk to the people in Queensbridge who desperately need employment opportunities. Talk to people in Astoria housing. Talk to all those other communities that have been isolated and left out in the advancement in the city because of lack of job opportunities. I think that this this Long Island City project would have provided an immense opportunity for people to both receive training and family sustaining job opportunities. And I've been talking with them. I talked with Bishop Taylor and also other leaders in those communities who believe that they are being cheated and deprived of opportunities to be able to advance. And now that we're in a pandemic and that curtain has been peeled back and showing that these are communities that have been most drastically impacted, and now they're going to be cheated out of the opportunity to have access to good quality family sustaining jobs, which would further build stronger communities. And so I don't know what the victory is in defeating the development there.
Well, by the way, we did try to get some of the opponents on. We tried to get Jimmy Van Bramer. We tried to get Mike Janaris, respectively the city council member and the state senator for the area. We even called Stop Sunnyside Yards Coalition. They cannot provide anyone. But if I could summarize, my feeling is, they see inequities in the world. They see massive income inequality. They see high housing costs, and they see development, and they sort of connect those two things. Assuming that one causes the other, that development causes gentrification, causes displacement, causes income inequality, causes rents to go up. Regardless of what the economists say, that's a narrative that the de Blasio administration, the political establishment has not overcome. And in terms of the election results, we're seeing the Democratic Socialists of America, win quite a few races. And I think, and you can tell me if you disagree, that is affecting how current elected officials are approaching these projects.
I would agree with you on that it is affecting, because prior to Amazon, both Gianaris and Jimmy were pro-development. And then now all of a sudden they're against development. But I mean, it's the AOCs who are, I guess, people are marching to her drumbeat, I guess. But I think if you look across the country, unfortunately for the DSA, Bernie lost, and he lost big time, which showed throughout the country that there's a moderate, I think, group that's stronger than the DSA, in my opinion.
But that doesn't help New York City necessarily, right? Because these fights are local, right? These,
and you know what? You know how it could help? It could help by people actually going out and voting in the primaries. I never voted in the primaries until 2 years ago. I never voted any day other than November, right? I never went to go vote. In the last 2 years, I've been voting on a June and January in various months, because I just realized only 2 years ago that primaries are extremely important. And in the primaries, it's only a small turnout, 10,000, 12,000. I mean, look at Melinda Katz's primary. She only won by 55 people. 55 people she won by. And if I think more New Yorkers were to get out and vote in the primaries, you'll probably start seeing that shift changing.
Kyle, I mentioned, the political power that 32BJ has. Do you have any particular political agenda that you're trying to accomplish going forward here? Obviously, you have tens of thousands of members and their interests, but tell me what you'd like to see happen there and where you're pushing that.
Our biggest program is to continue to educate our membership on the importance of that politics plays in their everyday life, to register to vote all of a large percentage of our membership, to get them engaged in politics. I think that there's been a sense that a lot of communities are disenfranchised by their leaders, and I think that's part of the change as well. But that comes because of their environment and their conditions, because they haven't seen the changes that they expect to come from government that will help to change their current conditions. One, the poverty that exists and the lack of job opportunities that exist is another thing that adds to the mentality that politics aren't working for them. But what we believe is politics does work, and that it's important that your voice is heard. If your voice is not heard, then that's what happens. And you have a few people dictating the outcome for so many. And so our job is to educate our members, make sure they understand the value that politics plays in the quality of their life, the quality of their communities. We have 85,000 members in the city, most of whom are employed with family health benefits, family sustainable wages, retirement futures. But that's not everyone in the communities that they live in and come from. And so to build good communities and strong communities, the communities in which my members live in, we need greater opportunities, greater employment opportunities. Small businesses need to be able to thrive in this city. And that doesn't happen without responsible development. And so we will be actively engaging our members in this election season in 21 to make sure they understand really what's at stake here. Because,
now, Eric, I just want to switch to Eric because you deal with people who hunt for homes, right? And this is a large part of what this is about. What process, do people go through when they hunt for housing? This notion that these developments are going to bring an influx of people looking for housing and they're going to displace the people who are already there. In other words, not just fill up the new developments, but also push people out from existing housing that is there. Is that the kind of thing that you see what do you see on the ground, in terms of how people hunt for housing and the effect it has on existing residents?
And we see people moving around a lot, and we see people moving around from either in this neighborhood in particular, they jump from building to building. And whether it's a newer building opening up, or maybe they just don't like the style or design of a building, or maybe their family's growing, or whatever the case may be, people do move around from building to building. Or maybe they're renting out. Like we typically see one client or person, family, whatever, 3 times every 5 years. So first they're coming into the neighborhood, we're introducing them, and they're probably renting out like a studio or a 1-bedroom. Maybe a year or 2 years later, they're growing a family, or their career has changed or whatever, and now they're moving into a bigger apartment. And then finally, they come to us to buy a home. And where we're actually kind of like losing people is where, unfortunately, there's not that many units here that are like 4 bedrooms or 3 bedrooms and 4 bedrooms and for more bigger families. And that's kind of like where you start seeing people going into the suburbs, is because maybe they have 3 kids or 4 kids, whatever it is that they have, and they can't really find the space for them over here. But we are starting to see a shift where, prior we were seeing younger families with kids maybe up until like 10 or 12. Just in the last couple of years, we are finally seeing like tweens and young teens staying here, because there is a little bit more larger family type units being developed here.
I guess the point I'm trying to bring out is that whether these developments occur or not, people are still going to be hunting for housing.
Correct.
The question is, like, what do you have available for them? And right now there's not that much available, even though it seems like there's been a construction boom, a housing boom. But in fact, we've added 100,000 for every 100,000 jobs. We've only added 19,000 housing units. That's been our pace of growth.
So that goes to the whole supply and demand. People talk about pricing and getting priced out. The less supply, the more demand. That's what increases prices. The more development you allow, more units being developed, you're going to flood the market with more units, going to bring down the prices. That's just simple economics.
Yeah, I think that's where the disconnect is occurring, because these groups are not getting that. Their actual position is that that there should be no profit in housing whatsoever, and that if we remove the profit from housing, the prices would go down, and somehow we would supply enough to house everybody.
Who's going to build
that's
that?
not been tested in this country, but I mean, how do you when you see
Who's going to build that? That's what I want to know.
What's your question, Kyle?
Who's going to build that that housing?
It's funny because I looked at Sunnyside Yard, which is another massive plan, and I looked at the alternatives that the opponents want, and they all involved purely public expenditures. They want the city to build new hospitals, new parks, new schools, new subway stations. And so it was all public investment, no private investment whatsoever. And I just wondered, it occurred to me, like, where is all this money going to come from? How is that feasible? And by the way, when those improvements happen, why wouldn't that cause rents to go up when the neighborhood?
And Sunnyside Yard is a good example. I mean, that's 12,000, proposed 12,000 units of affordable housing, with 6,000 being very low income housing. I mean, that's what this city needs.
And 6,000 for ownership.
Right, and 6,000 for ownership. I mean, that's what affordable, and that's what this city needs. Giving people like my members and other folks opportunities to be invested, continue to be invested in the city. You're talking about the moving population. You create a project like that, and you create stable communities. And so,
you know what's amazing is that I think, this is a de Blasio plan, by the way, and he went out and he put on paper a plan which I would assume, thought would be just, greeted with open arms by everyone. You mentioned, 12,000 units of housing, all 100% affordable, and half of them very low income, right? It's questionable whether you could even make this work economically, but assuming you could, but yet, and he threw in the open space, and he threw in the home ownership, and he threw in, 18 months of community engagement. He had this whole steering committee, so he thought he checked off all the boxes, yet immediately the opposition popped up. And it was so strong that you mentioned AOC, Erik, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She was actually chased off this advisory committee, by the pressure against, and it's also, the project has been disavowed by Jimmy Van Bramer and Mike Gianaris, who are two of the anti-development.
Where she's on the advisory committee, she can advise them on what her followers or people would like to see, and she pulls out. There's absolutely no sense in that. Where she can actually make a difference for her people, but she pulls out. She doesn't want to hear it.
Well, I think one of the problems was she was trying to represent a constituency that actually doesn't want anything to happen at Sunnyside Yard. Another person that pulled out at the same time, was the head of an activist group, the Justice for All Coalition. And she came out and said, our position is no development over the yard. So here was this advisory committee to advise on what kind of development to build over a Sunnyside Yard. And her position was no development. So I can almost understand why she quit, because what's the point of being on a committee when your advice is don't do anything? So I don't know. Let me just mention the other project. I mentioned we go through some of the details. So your Long Island City, or your LIC, would have 10 to 12, I mentioned that one. Let's go to Astoria. Kaufman, Astoria Studios, Silverstein Properties, and Bedrock Real Estate Partners came up with this plan. It's a $2 billion plan, 2 million square feet, mixed use development. It's 2,700 units of housing, 700 affordable units, 200,000 square feet of retail, and then you have creative industry space and small business space, 2 acres of open space, movie theater, grocery, community health facility, senior housing. They threw in all these goodies, and yet still there was opposition right away. What do you think? How do you think this is going to play out, over the next year and a half? If I could just get your take on from both of you on how you see this developing. Who's going to win?
I think
I'll tell you who I'd like to see win. Go ahead, Erik. You go. You take your first shot.
I think at the end of the day, you're going to see all these projects win, and I'll tell you why. Because there's so many people who are out of work right now, and people just need jobs. And I don't know how you say no to somebody getting up in the morning, working, and getting a paycheck at the end of the week. And when people don't want to collect unemployment for the rest of their lives. I mean, they can only collect it for, I think, 40 weeks or whatever, right? But they don't want to collect unemployment for the rest of their lives. And when people start seeing that there's a lot of jobs at stake over here, and they could be benefiting from those jobs, they'll eventually start speaking out. And I think you're going to start seeing people speaking out soon.
What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I hope that this is a development that moves forward. I mean, they're going to create opportunities for small businesses, more housing. We're currently experiencing a flight from New York, and I think that part of that is being able to have the creation of these type of communities that address a housing shortage in the city, but also that create good, as I want to continue to advocate for, good family sustaining jobs, but also a development that is responsible. And I think that this is one of them. There's an artist community that I understand has been part of that area, and they're addressing the needs of that community too, to make sure that there's continued space for them to continue to stay there and to thrive. I mean, this is the type of development that the city's going to need. And if we're not creating jobs in this city, and we're not creating housing in this city, then how do we expect us to continue to come out of the crisis that we're in? Jobs to create job creation is what's going to do it. Building our tax base is going to do that by putting people back to work. And you just can't put them back to work in poverty jobs. You have to put them back to work in family sustaining jobs. And I think that that's going to be the draw and the attraction of people coming back into this city. And so absent responsible development, I think this city will be in serious trouble about figuring out how do we an economy that rebounds from this pandemic.
You know, I looked up the 8 reasons to oppose Sunnyside Yards, and I'm just going to run through them. The first 3 are all kind of related: gentrification, displacement, and rent increases. And I don't want to get into all the economics because I think we've already sort of touched on, Eric's kind of touched on this, you know, the supply and demand issue, that, you know, if you have people looking for housing and there's not much housing available, you know, there are bidding wars for, you know, what is available, and that drives up the prices. And then you had 3 kind of NIMBY related reasons. One is noise pollution, you know, one is traffic, the old standby, and the other was decades of construction. You know, and construction, no one likes to live near construction. I think we understand that. You know, but the alternative is if nothing happens, then you become, as the mayor has said many times, you become San Francisco, where, you know, in order to work in the city, you have to live very far away from it because you can't afford, you know, any of the very few housing opportunities that are there. And then there was one that just blew me away. This reason was carbon emissions, because buildings are the #1 source of greenhouse gas emissions in the city. So the theory of this group is that if you build buildings, you will increase the city's carbon footprint. And the reason I don't know how you perceive that statement, but it occurs to me that it's not the buildings that are emitting carbon, it's the people who are living in the buildings. You know, they need heat and electricity, and so they're going to be living somewhere, you know. And I don't know if you remember Mike Bloomberg's philosophy of land use, but it was that if we move them all out to the suburbs, their carbon footprint is larger than if they live here in the city in apartments taking mass transit. So how do you wrap your brains around, you know, these kinds of cases, these arguments?
Well, I think technology has presented opportunities for us to create more efficient operating buildings that create less carbon footprints in our city. And the city council has taken this very seriously and has been passing legislation to curb the carbon footprint from buildings. But we're talking about new development now. And here's the opportunity to build these new technology advanced structures that address the problem of carbon footprint in our city. And so, but what are we saying? That we're just going to stop building now in the city? That there should be no more construction in the city? That's just not realistic. What's realistic, though, is to have responsible construction and create standards that addresses the climate issue that this world is concerned about, and that we're all concerned about. It impacts my membership as much or more than most others, because of the communities that we live in. And so we're very interested in responsible development, but I think that to think that the city should stop building, period, is just not realistic.
Yeah, I think that's a good point you make about the newer buildings are being more efficient than the older ones. You know, they're so airtight now, and you know they're just so efficient in their ventilation and the heat exchangers, and some of them have solar panels on their roofs. Or
using more clean energy, way more clean energy. Even as I understood it, a part of the Long Island City development was talking about sharing their power with Queensbridge housing and running new clean, efficient power into Queensbridge housing. But that's not going to happen. It's been deaded by the city.
And so, Erik, you know, you work on the ground in Queens. I know you started your career, I think, in Manhattan, but you realized the opportunities in Queens. You came back, so you've seen sort of the evolution of the neighborhood. Long Island City is one of those places where people began to realize, hey, if I want to work in Manhattan but not live there, this is a great spot to be because the commute is it's really close to Manhattan. It's a pretty quick commute. You know, the only thing was it was mostly an industrial kind of manufacturing district. And so the housing opportunities have only started to spring up in the last 10, 15 years, you know, because of zoning changes and apartments. But so how have you seen that neighborhood change? And do you think that will continue?
I mean, I've seen it obviously change dramatically. I've lived in the neighborhood for 15 years now. In those probably 16 years, just focusing on this neighborhood. And so within that time, I've seen it change a huge amount of time, like dramatically. I live in Court Square, and when I moved into Court Square, it was just my building, and it was the Citibank building, which is now Altice. But within probably 6 or 7 years, it's turned into a little city. And we talk about carbon, and you talked about Bloomberg. People move to Long Island. It's larger. I'm fortunate where I'm in New York. I don't drive ever. But B, I'm fortunate where I walk to work. And a lot of these projects are live, work, play, everything are in with these communities. And if you're building something where somebody can live upstairs and work downstairs or across the street, isn't that very environmentally conscious, I think? With regards to how the neighborhood is changing, I mean, I've seen it change dramatically because it's all industrial. Obviously, no one's really getting displaced, right? It's a lot of the development have been on iron lots, lots with like lumber or whatever, or one-story industrial buildings, or the Pepsi Cola plant that TF Cornerstone did, or a lot of just industrial things where maybe it created 4 jobs or 5 jobs in a warehouse, right? And now you created hundreds of apartments where maybe there's in that one building, aside from the construction jobs, you also have maybe 30 or 40 permanent jobs.
Right. Those are Kyle's members, right? Working in those buildings.
Yeah, man. Well, I'd be interested in understanding how, you know, we bring industry back to New York because no one's answered that question. It's not, you know, but we're working to achieve that. I remember I used to work back there, which is now a huge new community. But when I worked there and when I was in college, it was dicey just walking to and from the train station to my place of employment. I worked with Centralized Laboratories, and it was nothing but old, closed down industrial neighborhood, which most of the industry had already left. And so I just want to know, what are we going to do with these communities? I'd love to see industry return to New York, but if absent, you know, people figuring out how do we draw industry back to New York, and I think there's some of that happening. We have to continue to figure out how do we create and construct new jobs for this city. So that
you know, that's a good point. You know, in terms of this whole argument about what do you do with this old industrial space? You know, at one time in New York City, we had 1 million manufacturing jobs, literally 1 million manufacturing jobs. And now we have about 75,000 manufacturing jobs. So I don't think anyone realistically expects that we're going to go back to the way things were. And the second thing is, like, what if you can sustain or bring back manufacturing jobs? Are they going to be the same jobs of yesteryear where you're making widgets, or are they going to be sort of newer, you know, smaller shop, you know, higher tech manufacturing?
That's right. That's
so,
right.
So you know, I saw this this quote from one of the anti-Sunnyside Yard people. She's like, what we need to be making here is, you know, we need to make solar panels here, and we need to make wind turbines, and we need to make protective equipment to prepare for the next pandemic and the next superstorm Sandy. You know, and I was thinking, you know, that horse has left the barn. You know, that ship has sailed. Like, all of those industries that moved to Asia and other states years and years ago. But there are things that New York can build. It's just not that, right? So the idea that we can only bring back, you know, those specific jobs and we're just going to hold out until those come back. I mean, aren't you a little afraid that we could be sort of stuck in this pattern where nothing gets done and we're trying to aim for something that's not achievable?
Well, if these people were around, what was it, 16, 17 years ago, when T.F. Cornerstone bought the Pepsi-Cola bottling plant, that project probably wouldn't have happened, but guess what else wouldn't have happened? The 11 or 12 acres of waterfront park where you'll find the people who are against all the development picnicking at the beautiful park with the beautiful Pepsi sign. That wouldn't have happened if they were around 17 years ago or whatever. Also, all the jobs, the park jobs, the cafes that open up in the park, all the building operation jobs, that wouldn't have happened either. You know, when I first came here, there was a beautiful, nice little pharmacy on Vernon Boulevard, which is still here, right? And I shop at that pharmacy, but now there's a Duane Reade, right? You'll see them all at the Duane Reade buying whatever they need to buy at the Duane Reade. Duane Reade wouldn't have been here. Neither would have the supermarket next door or the nice, cool coffee shop down the block where they like to get their coffee or whatever it is that they're drinking, because that wouldn't have been here either. So you have to think about that also.
You know, it reminds me of that movie, right, Back to the Future, where things start to disappear, you know, depending on how things change, and like you realize that would never have been there. I mean, can you imagine Long Island City today, you know, if we were holding out for those infrastructure jobs to come back, you'd still have the closed off waterfront, you'd still have massed, you know, expanses of concrete and empty buildings, and we'd be trying to compete with, I don't know, China and Southeast Asia and Pakistan and, you know, Guatemala, you know, manufacturing textiles or whatever it may be, and we would be, I think they would still be empty, don't you? Or?
Guess what else would be happening if they didn't develop Long Island City? Prices in New York City would be way higher than it is now because of the thousands of housing that's over here. It's what brought prices down to what it is now, I guess, right? But if they didn't develop, you know, thank God for Bloomberg, if he didn't rezone all the waterfront, not just in Long Island City, but in Brooklyn or everywhere else, there would have been a lack of housing. And you would have seen prices going up. You would have seen a lot less people over here. Who knows where the city would have been. He did that, I think, right after he wanted to boost the economy after 9/11. He took over, if you remember, right after 9/11, right? And we needed it. New York needed help. And he was a visionary, and he came in and he said, we're going to open up parkland and we're going to rezone the waterfront, and that's what's going to pay for the park and the waterfront and open up. Before then, it was all industrial in the waterfront. New York City had all industrial along the waterfront.
Now, Kyle, I want to ask you about your community board experience. You know, for our viewers who don't know, community boards, you know, there are 59 of them in New York City, and they each have up to 50 members. And, you know, they kind of weigh in on local proposals. And so you've been on your board for quite a few years, I think. So can you give me an idea of like what people on the board think, like have their attitudes changed at all towards development in the last few years?
Well, I'm on community board 13 in Queens. It's a little less contentious because there's not a whole lot of major development happening out of my community board. But what I do believe is that from the community board perspective, people are concerned about the quality of life in their communities. They're concerned about being able to continue to afford to remain in the communities that they live in. I think that happens though, because that'll happen if there's no opportunities or jobs that allow people to stay in a city that's becoming more and more expensive to live in. Where do they go? Because if we don't have jobs, then people will. If there's no jobs here for working people, then they leave the city to go where the jobs are at or where they can afford to live. And so we have to make sure that both it's affordable and that there's job opportunities. New York City can be the new tech hub of the country. And I think that that's an opportunity that we shouldn't allow to pass us either. And that's happens if we convert these areas that we've seen dwindle because of the lack of industrial work here in the city, which is you pointed out appropriately, is not going to return, at least not to the way in which we understood it in the past. There's going to be a new economy in this city, and it's going to be based around I believe the new tech companies that will want to come here and flock to New York. And I also believe that, building housing for all the support services that are necessary to run a city of our size. My members work in these buildings, in commercial buildings and residential buildings. They're all essential workers. If my members weren't on the job, as people had to shelter in place in these apartment buildings, I'm not sure how a lot of these folks would have been able to survive. Sheltered in place, relying on people who had to leave their homes and come to those buildings to keep the environment both safe and secure. And so I think that these community boards have to take in consideration, how do they keep the vibrance of their communities also? How do they keep people there? And again, I keep going back to the fact that we've never seen this level of unemployment before in the history of this country. And the communities of color have been hardest hit. Black population in the cities, 16.8% unemployed. And we need to provide quality family-sustaining jobs. We need to continue to build affordable housing. We need to continue to build housing that will attract people and keep people in the city, and that will help drive an economy that will get us out of this, recover.
That's a great point to wrap up on. I think the big question going forward is whether the pandemic actually changes anyone's minds. So far, I actually haven't seen that many minds change. But maybe what it might do is the people who are in favor of development or more housing, which tend to be a quiet majority, they might become more active. So that is, I think that's the big question going forward, whether or not it is the very vocal and well-organized minority of folks who don't want anything to happen, whether they prevail over this sort of complacent majority that we have seen. Like, for instance, in the Amazon, where all the polls showed that the Amazon proposal was popular, but there wasn't great demonstrations of support for that. And therefore, the elected officials who were against it, felt no pressure at all from the community. So Erik, do you have any final thoughts? We only have about a minute left.
Yeah, I think so. Aside from the construction and the real estate jobs that these projects create, they also create other jobs. When there's more people, when there's apartments or jobs or whatever, restaurants come, retail comes. And then you have restaurant servers, waiters, and kitchen staff, and maybe a small business entrepreneur will want to start a business, and that creates more jobs. So people don't really think of the other jobs. They're probably just associating real estate with maybe a luxury, or whoever knows what they're associating real estate with. It's not just real estate, which unfortunately people paint as a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. But real estate helps support other jobs like restaurants and boutiques or shops or whatever it is. This is why we need projects like this.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're going to have to wrap it up there. Erik Benaim from Modern Spaces Realty and Kyle Bragg from the president of 32BJ SEIU. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. And just a note to our viewers, we have a couple of more TD Talks this month coming up. On September 16th, Bob Knackel, who everyone in real estate knows, will be talking about how to do business in any real estate cycle, up or down. And on September 23rd, the super broker Fred Eklund will be on, so be sure to tune in for that. Thanks again to Erik Benaim and Kyle Bragg. And
thank you.
And thank you.
Stay healthy, stay safe.
Thanks to all of our viewers for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on TRD Talks Live.